Almighty God, by whom alone kings reign and princes decree justice, and from whom alone cometh all counsel, wisdom, and understanding, we, thine unworthy servants, here gathered together in thy name, do most humbly beseech thee to send down thy heavenly wisdom from above, to direct and guide us in all our consultations, and grant that we, having thy fair orders before our eyes, and laying aside all private interests, prejudice, and partial affections, the result of all our counsels may be to the glory of thy blessed name, the maintenance of true religion and justice, the safety, honor, and happiness of the Queen, the public weal, peace, and tranquility of St. Lucia, and the uniting and knitting together of the hearts of all persons and estates within the same, in true Christian love and charity, one towards another, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen. The grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, the love of God, and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with us all, now and forevermore. Amen.
Announcements. Good morning, members. I have received excuses from the following: Senator Dr. Adrian Auger, Honorable Member for Ancillary Canaries, Honorable Member for Castries South, and the Honorable Member for Dennery South, who will be unable to attend today's sitting. I have also received communication from the Honorable Member for Labrie, stating that he will be present for the sitting, but he will be late. Members, Mr. Speaker and I wish to note the passing of the former Minister Arsene James on 29th July 2018. He served as the member for Micoud South from 3rd December 2001 to 19th May 2016, leader of the opposition from 2003 to 2004, and Minister for Education 2006 to 2011. The many accolades lavished upon him by distinguished fellow parliamentarians, former students, and many members of the public speak to the measure of the man. Mr. Speaker and I note that he was a man who lived by well-defined and articulated principles and with great aplomb. His good works and deeds are etched in the history of this, our beloved nation. Mr. Speaker and I extend our sincere condolences to the family. May he rest in peace. Honorable Prime Minister and Minister for Finance, Economic Growth, Job Creation, External Affairs, and the Public Service.
Thank you, Madam President. Be it resolved that this Parliament in joint session assembled do note with the sadness the passing of the Honourable Arsene James, SLC, former Member of Parliament, on Saturday, the 29th, July 2018. Be it resolved that the Parliament expresses deepest condolences to the family of Honourable Arsene James and the people of Micoud South. And be it further resolved that a copy of this motion be transmitted to the family of the Honourable Arsene James, SLC.
Speaker, I beg to second the motion.
Honourable members, the question is that Parliament, in joint session assembled, do note with sadness the passing of Honourable Arsene James, SLC, former Member of Parliament, on Saturday, 29th July 2018. Be it resolved that Parliament expresses deepest condolences to the family of the Honourable Arsene James and the people of Micoud South. And be it further resolved that a copy of this motion be transmitted to the family of the late Honourable Arsene James, SLC. Prime Minister and
Minister of Agriculture.
okay.
Member for
Member for Babano and Minister for Agriculture, Fisheries, Physical Planning, Natural Resources and Cooperatives.
Thank you very much, Madam President, Mr. Speaker. I think I will set the tone for today's joint sitting. And I'm sure those of us who know the relationship between us and myself would agree that I should. Let me first start by expressing our condolences to the family for the sudden passing of Arsene James. I must say, Madam Speaker, Mr. President, it came as a shock. Because when I got a call from the Honorable Prime Minister Wednesday night, right, I was in Grenada, and he conveyed to me that Arsene was taken to St. Jude's, and he'll keep me posted as to the development. I wasn't expecting to get another call Sunday morning when I landed at George F.L. Childs from the Prime Minister, informing me that Arsene had died. I say so, Madam Speaker, Madam President, Mr. Speaker, because before I traveled to Grenada, my management team of WASCO was in discussion with Arsene as it pertains to a long outstanding project in the constituency that he represented for 15 years. And he was given all the support, all the guidance. And to hear his passing that same week was very, very much a surprise. But I will say today, the gentleman I know was very punctual as it pertains to time. It's disheartening to see that we have a joint sitting today and it's at 1 hour past the time you're supposed to start. He would not be happy about this. At least we should have made an effort in recognition of his contribution to start on time. And I'm hoping that in the future, learning from his speech and his leadership and his example, this Honorable House would start on time. Madam President, Mr. Speaker, I'm sure all of us will stand and speak as to what a good man he was. He was a leader. He was not vindictive. And all that is true. What I'm hoping will come out of this session here today is to learn and practice what Arsene stood for. He was not vindictive. And he had reasons to be vindictive. I can speak to it because he should tell me about his experiences. And I'm sure we all will remember the review of the Tongue and Village Council operations. He was not happy as to what was written about him as an individual and his family. But yet still, he carried no animosity. Yet still he carried no animosity, no hatred as to what was written about him. That is a gentleman that we should follow his footsteps. And I say so, Madam Speaker, because those of us here who are still around and still believe in these principles should speak about it. The time has come, and I'm hoping from today, the time will come where we shall express different opinions. But we should not be out there denigrating people's reputation in the interest of politics. He was not a gentleman of that character. So let's learn. Let's learn from him. Let's continue as parliamentarians in this honorable house, Madam President, Mr. Speaker, to practice the principles that he believed in. And I'm hoping that when we stand up to talk in this honorable house, we'll give a commitment to each other that will stop the malparlaying and the denigration of us as politicians. That has to stop. So it's unfortunate that he has gone and we're here today. But I'm sure, Madam Speaker, Mr. President, Madam President, Mr. Speaker, I'm very emotional and I'm expecting, you all expect that. We shall learn from the character and the leadership of Mr. Arsene James. I thank you.
Member for Castries Southeast.
Thank you, Madam President, Mr. Speaker. It is indeed a sad moment for us. I know not just on this side of the House, but the entire House of Parliament in St. Lucia and the people of St. Lucia at large. I want to use this quote: the greatest use of life is to spend it for something that will outlast it. And the life of Mr. James is truly one that was lived in a way that even after he has passed, we can still see the effects of his accomplishment and all that he did. My memory goes back to my first formal encounter with Mr. James many years ago, when he was the parliamentary representative in opposition for Micoud South. And I then served as president of the National Council on Public Transport. And we engaged in a self-help project led by Mr. James to do some remedial work on the Angers-Deriso Road. That was my first formal encounter with him. And he was there with his four-door pickup, with material in the back and his shovel, trying to do some work to bring relief to the people that he so dearly loved and represented. And many of us politicians in this house who have had the opportunity on serving on both sides of the house have had some experience of that nature where we have had to step in. And I'm talking about politicians on both sides of the house have had to encounter situations like this. But Mr. James was a man with a difference. And usually, when people pass, we say all the nice things about them. But while they are alive, we demonize them as much as possible. I guess when they are past, they are no longer afraid. But my encounters with Mr. James in the campaign of 2005-2006, Mr. James was always seen as a father figure and one that we could go to for advice. His very quiet demeanor did not state much about the depth of the individual in the person of Mr. James. Mr. James was truly a man that when we fled up and we said this and we said that and you wanted the voice of reason, you would go to Mr. James and in his own quiet way, he would rebuke you and chastise you without you even realizing that is what he was doing. I know that many times we left Castries and we went down to Micoud and sat in his living room to get political advice as to how to deal with challenging situations that we had. And I can tell you, as much as I would talk, and Minister Ezekiel and others would talk, Mr. James always had the final word. And when he spoke, and he said, that is what it is, the rest of us agreed, this is what it is. And I am proud of the individual that he was, for the contribution that he made. I remember in discussions with him, he said, he think he started teaching at the age of 12, because when he said it was the number of years that he had been teaching, and we were looking at his stature and his age, and we are wondering, but how is that possible? At what age did you start teaching? His contribution is meaningful. And when he came to the parliament, and he was the Minister for Education, I can tell you, when we sat in opposition, you wanted any figures of what had transpired in Parliament, you just turned to Mr. James and he would have the information readily available. So even when a member on our side would be on their feet making a contribution, in his own quiet way, he would whisper to you the accurate numbers if you missed the numbers. That was the mark of the individual that we are speaking about here. And having had the opportunity to serve with him was indeed a great lesson. Because when we are much younger, the energy that we have is different to the energy that you'd see from an individual. But nothing replaces the experience and the knowledge of those persons who have been there. And I know that he had faced many political challenges in government, out of government, in opposition, and through all of that, he maintained the same demeanor. I never saw him got overly excited, get vexed about things. You know, Mr. James maintained a certain profile that a lot of us would do well to emulate in the political arena. That did not make him any less effective as a parliamentary representative or a minister of government. And so in paying tribute to him, and in saying to his family and to the people of St. Lucia today, we have truly missed a good man. A man who did what he did well in his own style. He never tried to adopt the style of other people or the ways of other people. He was who he was, and he always maintained that. I don't know whether I should call it fortunate. I don't even know how to describe the situation. But I may have been one of the last persons in this house who had the opportunity to speak to Mr. James before he passed. Because my brother was in the room next to him at the hospital in Martinique. And when I went there about 6 p.m. that evening, I had the opportunity to go next to his bed. And I can say, as I've said to the family, he was in good spirit and he was very hopeful. I spoke to him and I asked him whether he was in any pain, and he said no, he had no pains. There comes a point in your life when you dread getting a phone call, when you don't know what to expect. You don't know if it is good news or if it is bad news. I was together with the doctor at about midnight when the call came, and they said, you all need to come to the hospital. And we knew that the news was not good. And I must mention, Mr. Speaker, Madam President, Joyce was indeed very strong for him, because she was the member of the family who was present. And when we went to that hospital, we got there about 1 o'clock and we left there at about 2 in the morning. And he was resting peacefully. I must say to all, I believe that Mr. James lived the life that he wanted to live. He lived a fulfilling life, a life of service, a life that gave to his community what he believed that he was called to do. And I am proud of this gentleman. I am proud of his contribution and what he has done for St. Lucia. Everywhere he served with distinction in his own style. You know what I loved about Mr. James? No matter what we try to do to get Mr. James to spend a night in Castries, Mr. James said never, whatever time the meeting would end. And I remember him saying the last time he spent some time in Castries was in 1975, I think he said. He spent a night in Castries. No matter what it was, he had to sleep in Micoud South. I don't know what was so special about the sleep down there, but he had to. You know, and during that time, that conversation came about because Mr. James, there were rumors going around that Mr. James had left Micoud and he was living in Castries and he had a house in Cap Estate. You know, the normal political talk that people use to throw jabs at politicians. And that is how the conversation came about. And Mr. James said, the last time I slept in Castries, I think was in 1975 or thereabout. So it just tells you the nature of the individual, and you would laugh about the whole situation. His level of commitment to the people of Micoud South cannot be questioned by anyone. And even in succeeding him, the Prime Minister, as the parliamentary representative for Micoud South presently, depended a lot. You would still think that Mr. James was the parliamentary representative for Micoud South. He loved his people and he did what he loved for them. And I think if there's anything a man should be remembered by, is the things that he did that will outlast him. And the service to St. Lucia and the people of Micoud South will long outlive Mr. James. Convey my sincerest regards, sympathies, and prayers to the entire family of Mr. James and to the people of Micoud South and the people of St. Lucia by extension. I thank you.
Senator Isaac.
Good morning, Madam President, Mr. Speaker, Honorable Prime Minister, Leader of the Opposition, former parliamentarians, current parliamentarians. Good morning. The family, a special good morning to you, and welcome to this honorable house. To you this morning, I want to recite a Psalm of Life by Henry Longfellow. It really depicts my profile of Mr. James, who he was and what he stood for. If you will allow me, Madam President and Mr. Speaker. Tell me not in mournful numbers, life is but an empty dream. For the soul is dead that slumbers, and things are not what they seem. Life is real, life is earnest, and the grave is not its goal. Thus thou art, to dust returnest, was not spoken of the soul. Not enjoyment and not sorrow is our destined end or way, but to act that each tomorrow find us farther than today. Art is long and time is fleeting, and our hearts, though stout and brave, still like muffled drums are beating funeral marches to the grave. In the world's broad field of battle, in the bivouac of life, be not like dumb driven cattle, be a hero in the strife. Trust no future, however pleasant, let the dead past bury its dead. Act in the living presence, heart within and God overhead. Lives of great men all remind us we can make our lives sublime, and departing leave behind us footprints on the sands of time. Footprints that perhaps another, sailing our lives solemn main, a forlorn and shipwrecked brother, seeing shall take heart again. Let us then be up and doing, with a heart for any fate, still achieving, still pursuing, learn to labor and to wait. Godspeed, comrade, brother, fellow parliamentarian, Brother Arsene James. May his soul rest in perfect peace. To the family of Brother Arsene James, who has taught me much in my short time with him in this parliament, I say to you, accept our deepest condolences and sympathies. He was truly a simple man, a man who walked the walk and talked the walk, and he was really what you would say is a man of principle. And we actually enjoyed having Mr. James as a member of our United Workers' Party. So our deepest condolences to this entire parliament. He will be missed. Thank you.
Senator the Honorable Eubulus Raymond.
Madam President, Mr. Speaker, I said a lot in the Senate concerning Mr. Arsene James, and I just want to bring out just two things about him that will remain with me as long as I live. Number one is that of his humility, and number two, that of his humanity. The member for Babonneau and the member for Castries South, I believe, clearly and rightfully Southeast, sorry, there rightfully gave a very good understanding of who Mr. James was. Mr. James was a man who always showed some form of, I would say, happiness in the house, in spite of the political rhetoric on the opposite side. He never showed remorse. He never showed hatred, but always shows a sign of, I would say, happiness. And the member for Babonneau, I agree with you wholeheartedly that we as politicians, we should always understand that we are politicians, but more so, we are human beings. I want to, Madam President and Mr. Speaker, say to you, or recite to you, or the House, the words of Job. And you remember, and for those of us who understand the story of Job, Job was referred to as a man of God, a righteous man, but yet still Job suffered one of the most severe calamities. He went through the most difficult period ever recorded in history, not history, but in the Bible. And towards the end of his life, Madam President, Mr. Speaker, Job referred to life as a flower that quickly grows and then dies. And then he, Madam President, Mr. Speaker, also referred to life as a shadow. It is here for a short time and is gone. That's life. That's life. We are here today and tomorrow we are gone. And the question is, what do we do with the time that we have on this earth? What do we want to be remembered for? Do we want to be remembered for good things or for bad things? For the way we treat people? Do we want to be remembered for the kindness that we show to each other? Madam President, Mr. Speaker, I am happy for the example that Mr. James left with us as politicians. And I'm purpose in my heart. I have purpose in my heart, even before coming into politics, that I will never hold hatred, because I understand very well that hatred destroys the man who harbors it. And I can guarantee, I'm sure, Mr. President, Madam Speaker, that vindictiveness and hatred was not the cause of Mr. James' passing. And I want to caution us as politicians that these two things, vindictiveness and remorse, they kill. And they kill us from inside. So, Madam President, I want to thank the family for lending us Mr. James. Because a politician is not a politician without the support of his family or her family. So I want to thank you for the sacrifice that you have made on behalf of the people of St. Lucia for lending us your husband, your father, your uncle. Thank you very much, and may God bless you through this time of sorrow. Thank you.
Honorable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, Mr. Speaker, there's an old saying that says, sin doesn't but good of the dead. And the few words that I will say this morning in memory of Mr. Arsene James, I will first of all say that it's a pity that Mr. James cannot hear us. But the people who can hear us are his family and his friends, and I want to say to them my sincerest condolences. And I know how they feel. I know how siblings feel when they lose their parents. I had the unfortunate experience of losing my parents within 6 weeks of each other. So I understand how that goes. I want to tell them that in the practice of politics, it's very difficult. And I've been in that practice for a long time, although sometimes it's a cause of ridicule, but I've been in the practice of politics and representing people for over 20 years. So I understand the practice of politics, and I know how tough it is on the family in the practice of politics. Because in this practice, there are no holes are bad. So I want to tell them, thank you for allowing Mr. James to serve people for 15 years. Because without the strength of family and a few friends, you cannot remain in the practice of politics for that long. So I want to thank them sincerely and tell them that in the Parliament, Mr. James and I got on very well, actually, which you might find it, which maybe outside might find that difficult to believe. But we did get on very well. We understood each other. He understood the politics, and I understood his role, and he understood mine. So I want to tell him my sincere condolences on the loss of their husband, father, friend, brother, etc. But, Mr. Speaker, Madam President, I want to say one thing today. All of us in here will follow Mr. James. At some point, all of us will follow Mr. James. Each one of us. And that's the only good thing about death. It's certainty that every one of us will follow Mr. James. But while we are in the practice of politics, I want to speak to the living, those of us who are alive this morning. And the honorable member for Babano began. He opened the door to speak to those of us who are alive. Because in the practice of politics, we do not seem to understand that we're dealing with human beings, that our roles are temporary, and at some point it will end, either in death, in sickness, in opposition, or in government. And I think if we have to think of Mr. James in any positive way, is the way in which he handled himself in the politics of opposition and the politics of government. I felt very comfortable. And sadly to say, I don't feel the same way now, to call Mr. James and to discuss almost anything with him. And talking about calling, to be frank, the Honorable Prime Minister did call me on Sunday morning to inform me of the death of Mr. James, and I thank him for that. Immediately I called his family, because I know George went to school with me, just a little ahead of me. I called him, and I also called Thomas, but I was closer to George than Thomas. I did call and express my condolences after the Prime Minister called me. But I just want to say that we should look at death in terms of how do we live as the living. Because we always seem to forget that our role is temporary. And the way we deal with each other, the way we castigate each other, the way we go out to deliberately injure each other, the way we go out to hurt even people we perceive do not support us, apart from us inside of here. It's something that we have to try to stop. And when we say all the good things today about Arsene James, we'll go out tomorrow and next week and do the same things that we said we should not do. Death should be a wake-up call to us. To us. And I'm using the word us because I don't want to my words are not aimed at any particular person. It's us, we as practicing politicians. Do we do the right thing? Do we understand that this job is temporary? When we sit and we take decisions, do we know who we're going to hurt? Do we sit back and deliberately decide that we're going to hurt somebody? We're going to make somebody pay? Do we really, when we take when we do things, when we take decisions, when we speak about people, are we really understanding what we're doing? And expect when somebody dies, we'll come and say all the good things about them. And that is a practice that politicians, and I think I say it about politicians because politicians seem to be the worst profession as far as dealing with each other are concerned. We as politicians treat ourselves the worst. We don't even want to pay ourselves. Because we believe that somebody else will benefit if we pay ourselves. So I really want us to take this death of Mr. James in a serious way. Why do we deprive each other? Why do we make sure that we always want to have the one-man upmanship on each other? Why don't we want to give each other what is due to us? In the practice of politics, the practice of politics ought to be a noble profession. Politics ought to be about seeing about our fellow man. Politics ought to be about seeing about improving the quality and the standard of living of people. It's not supposed to be about ourselves, what I can get, what I can do, how I can wield the power to make somebody pay, to make somebody suffer, or to make ourselves rich. It ought not to be that. It ought to be the practice of serving people. It ought to be the practice of humility. And I'm sure that Arsene James personified humility. I'm sure. So we have to take it, and when we say the good things that we are saying about him, we have to look into ourselves. We have to take an inward journey and see if in our practice of politics we are doing what we said he was doing, or we are doing what we ought to do. And I say that, and I use the words we, because I believe that there can be a different way. I believe that the country can be different. I believe politicians can practice their trade and practice the craft of politics in a different manner. I believe that. I don't believe that should be in a situation where the winner takes all, and he takes all and runs away with all, and he assures himself that the others have nothing. Because if he takes all and the others have nothing, we will remain on one side and the other will be on the other side. I'm using the word we. Every profession has some ethics. Every profession. Every profession, some professionals say they will not do that to each other. They have ethics. They have a code of conduct. Why can't we as politicians have a code of conduct? Do we have a code of conduct? Do we decide that we're not going to be doing somebody something because we perceive that they're not on our side? Do we sit and when we take our decisions are based on need, or our decisions are based on our color? I understand the practice of politics. I understand what it means to have power. I understand it. I've been fortunate. I've been on both sides. So I understand it. But do we really use our power in the way that we are saying that Arsene James used it? Are we doing that? Or do we sit and we deliberately plan to ensure that another person gets injured or gets hurt or gets belittled? So my emotion this morning is not an emotion based on something that is superficial or playing to the gallery. I think it's at these times when we die, and all of us will die. Some may die earlier than others. Only this morning there was a gentleman called Angus Branford. I think some of you know him well. He came from London with his daughter. He's a good friend of the High Commissioner to London. He came from London with his daughter. On Friday, he was having lunch in a favorite place. And favorite that you know very well. He flew from St. Lucia to London on Sunday. When he arrived on Monday morning, he died with a heart attack on Monday morning as soon as he arrived in London. The guy is about 59 years old. He was healthy, he was enjoying his holiday, came with his daughter, and this morning he's a dead man, dead. Any one of us? Any one of us? That can happen too. So I really want, as I pay my respects to Mr. James, to see if we can cause a paradigm shift in the practice of politics. A paradigm shift in the practice of politics. Politicians ought not, when they are out of power, to believe that their life, when I say out of power, I mean out of this honorable house, to believe that they are useless, they can't earn a living, they can't get a job, they can't do anything because they happen to be in politics and they happen to be on the wrong side. So when they get out, they can't live. They ought to. We have to uplift the practice of politics. We have to uplift it. And if you have to live in Mr. James's memory, the memory should be to help us to uplift the practice of politics. And we have also to try to exercise some control over the people that support us. Because sometimes I know in the practice of politics, the people that support us push us to do things that we may not want to do. And that is reality. That's the reality of our game. So we have to try to exercise some control and some practice on that practice. Our humanity, our basic humanity, our love for each other ought to manifest itself in our profession. We ought to be examples. People ought to be able to say that he will not do that. This politician will not do that. But if you ask young people, what do they think of politicians? They will tell you that they think all of us, don't think they think any, they think all of us are a bunch of, I don't want to say. That is what our practice has become. That is what our profession, that is what our profession of politics has become. We've taken it to a limit where people do not even believe in us. And that is why we have to do all sorts of things to gain their favor. Because they did not believe in us. They did not believe that we're going to be what we say we're going to do. They always question our motives. So can we take a pause? Take a pause. We understand it. We have to do what we have to do. We have to try to stay in power. We have to try to get out of opposition and get into power. We have to try to stay in power. That is the practice. We understand that. But let's not do anything and everything to get in power or to get from or to stay in power. And I'm using the word we deliberately because I don't want to cast aspersions today on anyone. I don't want to do it. I want today to see if we can take it to a different plane, to a different height. So I really want to say that although Mr. James was not here in the Parliament in the last session, I mean from 2016, he, as I say to his family, I think he sat, when he was leader of the opposition, he sat right here, and after he sat in the space where other Baptists is, and I used to joke him about his tie. Sometimes tell him it's a little too short. See, asking the yellow tie too short. I could tell him that. Don't know if I can say the same thing now, but I could tell him that. I could tell him that, and I know he would take it in good faith. Sometimes when I used to get a little excited, he said to me, quiet. So you see, ask him, you encourage them guys doing nonsense. You causing that. I used to tell him that. Flashing mirrors. He used to remind me of the flashing mirrors. The flashing mirrors, he used to remind me. Sometimes he used to say, flashing mirrors. But I really hope that we can use his life as an example for us to try to change the practice of politics, the practice of politics in St. Lucia. We can't continue doing it like that. No one is going to benefit, even though we have short-term benefits. Even though there are short-term benefits, because some of us will benefit short-term, of course. But the short-term benefits must not be at the expense of the people of the country. So I want to end with a little quotation from Andrew Jackson. It says, when death comes, he respects neither age nor merit. He sweeps from this earthly existence the sick and the strong, the rich and the poor, and to teach us to live to be prepared for death. We should live to prepare for death. I thank you.
Member for Castries Central.
Thank you, Madam President, Mr. Speaker. I rise also to support the motion presented by the Honorable Prime Minister and to express my own sympathy to the family of Arsene James. I have to say, Madam President, Mr. Speaker, that in a very strange way, my interaction with Arsene was close yet far away. I certainly knew Arsene, or knew of Arsene as a child, a very young child. He was a household name. He was called Teacher Atin, because he taught at least 3 or 4 of my older siblings. And I recall as a child, maybe about 5 or 6 years old, my mom used to keep cows. She probably had about 10 of them. My mom, not my dad. And we used to supply milk. And Arsene's mom, Ma Tommy, was one of the ladies that we supplied milk to. And my older brother and I used to have to walk up the hill to their house to bring the bottle of milk on the morning to them. And I certainly can't remember ever speaking to Arsene at that time. Maybe I was too scared, because in those days, as teachers, children didn't just approach teachers and speak to them. You had that kind of fear of your teachers in those days. But I remember these memories very fondly, because our family home was walking distance away. And though we did not enjoy having to take the milk on the morning, I mean, I must have been 5 or 6, and my brother probably 7. So although we didn't enjoy walking up the hill every morning to bring the bottle of milk, when we got there, Ma Tommy always had a nice sandwich packed for us. So we'd bring the milk and we'd be walking back home eating the sandwiches he prepared. I say that as I reflect on the life of Arsene James and the family he came from, the James family in Deriso, And when I think of even the selflessness of his mother treating us as children in those days, I understand what characterized his life and the kind of selfless service that he gave in politics. The death of Arsene James was a shock to me as well, although the Prime Minister did call me too. The PM, it looks like you took your time to call everyone. The PM did call me. I was in London and the PM did call to see that Arsene James had taken ill, and then soon after I heard of the sad news. For the Christian, Madam President, Mr. Speaker, death is a friend. Death is a friend. Death has to be a friend for the Christian. That is what ushers us into eternal life. And indeed, we are created not to live on this earth, but to die so we can live forever. And it is my prayer, and I would think our prayer, that as a man who lived a selfless and charitable life in service, that Arsene would have received his friend death with open arms, and we pray that he is in fact in heaven. I say that my relationship with Arsene was close, yet from a distance, because I can't really say that we had many conversations or many discussions or long discussions. But I explained how I knew him as a child, and when we served in Parliament together, we were on opposite sides. So there was not much opportunity for interaction. And when I moved to this side, Arsene had left the house. So I was able to see his work and observe him from a distance. We live in a very noisy world, very noisy, where politicians in particular have to promote themselves. We have to say we're doing this and say we're doing that. And if we're not always promoting ourselves, persons assume we're doing nothing. But we also live in a world where silence speaks loudly. And it was in his silence, in his quiet, consistent way of doing things, that Arsene James speaks certainly to me. And we just heard little stories from honorable members of his continued commitment to the people of his constituency and of Micoud South, and indeed to St. Lucia. I was speaking, in fact, with a current PS just this morning about him, and she says in her interaction with him, she remembers him as a very dedicated person to tertiary education. In fact, she mentioned the NSDC project, and when in his time as Minister of Education, they were looking to get some additional funding for the OECS Skills Growth Project, which would have given a second chance opportunity for students, how passionate he was. And she was surprised that he himself turned up at a World Bank meeting to get extra money for that project so students could have a second chance. Arsene James was not somebody who would blow his trumpet, but certainly in the individual stories, even of the honorable member for Babuno, of Arsene speaking with him on a water project just days before his passing, shows that Arsene lived to the end to serve the people who had placed their trust and confidence in him from so way back. Sometimes we judge people from what we see. And in the case of Arsene, I too was guilty of that, and perhaps that's a bit of light humor. I recall my honorable friend, the member from Babonneau, we were seated on a plane just about to leave at UNR Airport, and Arsene's sister had passed. I think that might have been sometime in February. And I said to my colleague minister, you know, I really would like to get in touch with Arsene. I want to express my condolences. How do you think I would get in touch with Arsene? He says, how you mean? WhatsApp him. I said, Arsene has WhatsApp? So he says, how you mean? How you can do that to the man? So I just assumed that Arsene didn't have WhatsApp. And sure enough, when I WhatsApped Arsene, I said, good afternoon, Arsene, Sarah here. I'm keeping you in my thoughts and prayers. That was at 16:14. He responded right away at 16:18. And I said, I assumed you were not on WhatsApp. That's why I did not message earlier. So there I was, assuming that Arsene was not in touch with technology, and how wrong I was. And this is just the kind of assumptions we make, because people are not out there blowing their trumpet and saying this and that. But that doesn't mean that they are not consistent and that their lives, in its own quietness, makes an indelible mark on people. And Arsene came from a family of service. I'm just thinking of his commitment to education. I can think of in addition to him, 2 of his family members, I'm sure there are more, who we knew in the community as teachers. Teacher Nifa, this was the one who passed just a few months ago. Teacher Baby, Margaret Emmanuel, we know her. These are the people we knew in the community. And of course, Teacher Atin, just 3 of them. So their commitment and the contribution that people like Arsene James have made to the community of Micoud South is unparalleled. So I really would like to express my deepest regret at his passing, and to echo the words that some of the honorable members have spoken about his silence, about how much he impacted the politics of St. Lucia, not by going out there and blowing his own trumpet or saying what he did, but even right up to his last moments, he was working and never stopped working. And certainly that is something we can emulate. Sometimes talking stops us from working. Spend more time actually working, and then others do recognize how loudly our silence speaks. I thank you, Madam President.
Senator the Honorable Herman Francis.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker, Madam President, Mr. Speaker, Senators, members of the Lower House, friends and family of Mr. Arsene James. But before I start, I want to apologize for the absence of the Honorable Bradley Felix, member for Swazell. Unfortunately, he wouldn't be able to make it this morning, so I want to apologize for his absence. Much has been said this morning by honorable members, and they have done so eloquently that there isn't much for me to say. I therefore crave the indulgence of members of the House so that I can read Psalms 133, which is a favorite of my father. And it goes this way. Behold how good and how pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity. It is like the precious ointment upon the head that ran down the beard, even Aaron's beard, that went down to the skirts of his garments, and as the dew of Hermon, and as the dew that descended upon the mountains of Zion. For there the Lord commanded the blessing, even life forevermore. End. I chose this psalm this morning because we are witnessing a decorum in the House today that is pleasant to all present, and those following on television and radio. I therefore challenge every one of us to take this opportunity to reflect on how we conduct our business in the respective houses. The great and wonderful expressions of love and admiration for our brother is lost to him. He cannot hear or appreciate the sentiments expressed here today. We do it for the living, for his family and friends. If we are genuine in our expressions about Honorable Arsene James, then we need to take stock and recognize that the words we use to our brothers and sisters who are alive and can hear and feel pain need to be modified. As the representatives of the people, I am sure we can perform our task without using words that injure the reputation of each other. At funerals, the officiated priest or pastor never misses out on the opportunity to remind us that the ceremony is really for us, the living, to take stock of our lives and make the necessary adjustments. I know my words may not bring immediate changes in our discourses, but think about it and let us make a concerted effort to make things better. Honorable Arsene James epitomized my wish. Those who remember his stint in the House would attest to the fact that he never allowed himself to respond in kind, but he was effective in his responses, thereby exhibiting an ability to deliver a knockout without much effort. I guess his association with the late Sir John Compton and Honorable Henry Girardi helped him immensely in that regard. In conclusion, I wish to thank the family for sharing Honorable Arsene James with us. I pray that the good Lord will continue to keep and bless you. Thank you.
The Honorable Senator Mauricia Francis.
Thank you, Madam President, Mr. Speaker. The sudden passing of Mr. Arsene James indeed came as a shock to many and has created a level of sadness among his family, the community, the St. Lucian community, and of course to myself, since there had been no prior announcement of his ailment prior to his passing. It was one William Ross Wallace who said, "Every man dies, not every man lives." By all accounts, Arsene James really lived. He lived to serve his community and his country selflessly and with a high level of dignity and selflessness. I understand that he served in the field of education and as a parliamentarian for a combined number of 60 years. That is no easy feat. It is impossible to fully estimate the extent of good he has done during his earthly journey and the extent to which he has positively influenced lives in this nation and his community. It is equally impossible to adequately compensate for the tremendous value which he has created. As a parliamentarian, I have heard, and we have all heard, that he served his country and constituency with great commitment and dedication. His legacy in public life is one of excellence, statesmanship, decorum, respectfulness, integrity, and professionalism. He had a pleasant and welcoming personality, an abiding care and love for his constituents and people in general. He also shared unconditional love for his family and friends. I think it was last week I shared in the Senate my first encounter with Mr. Arsene James. It was when he was first elected as district representative for Micoud South. And it was his brother, the late Arsene James, who was a close friend of mine and professional. I had a very professional connection with him. And he introduced me to his brother Arsene. And Arsene's response was, I know who you are. Because his brother was saying to him, this is a gem from the West. He said, I know who you are. From today, you have dual citizenship, because by virtue of your matrimonial connections, you are equally a gem from the East. Don't be a stranger. Anytime you are in Micoud, please stop by to say hello. Don't be a stranger. So every time I encountered him subsequently, he reminded me of my dual citizenship. And he would say to me, you are not making use of your dual citizenship because I don't see you in Deriso enough. And he reminded me that the only time I would not meet him in Deriso was when he was up north performing his public duty. So I recall him fondly in that regard. I understand that in his community he was regarded as a good party man. He was not regarded, sorry, as a good party man. He was respected and loved for having the very real interest of all constituents. And I stress on all. He was a man of considerable political capital, experience, and discipline, and a high degree of common sense necessary for a politician in dealing with all the problems, issues, and needs that arise the day after election. And we've heard that this morning from the many tributes that have been presented. Though he was of a quiet demeanor, I understand that in dealing with political issues, he was very candid and never shied away from articulating his political convictions firmly. And of course, we heard that again this morning. His non-confrontational, gentlemanly mien was a great asset in helping to build bridges among protagonists. Our debt as a nation to this valuable son of the soil is considerable. No amount of words can truly express the gratitude we owe to him and his family for his many years of sterling service to this nation. Let his legacy be an example by which we should all live and all aspire to live our lives and conduct ourselves while we serve in public office. Indeed, I echo the sentiments of the other speakers before me as it relates to changing the way politics is played in this country. We have an opportunity to make a change. We have an opportunity to make a difference. We have an opportunity to inspire our young people. We have an opportunity to raise the bar and serve in a manner where when our turn comes and we stand in here to speak, at the end of the day, everybody will be singing a tone which is totally different. That he was bestowed with the St. Lucia Cross in honor of his long and meritorious service to public life was very fitting. However, on this occasion, Madam President, Mr. Speaker, I would like to propose that in further recognition and in appreciation of his service to country, that one of the secondary schools in Micoud be named after Arsene James. While on that point, Madam President, Mr. Speaker, I would also like to suggest that the same be done for Louis George. I believe there are 2 secondary schools in Micoud. I believe Louis George deserves such accolade as well. On behalf of our country, my family, and on my own personal behalf, I would like to express my appreciation to the Almighty God for Arsene's life, his valuable service and love, and extend sincerest condolences to his family. Evidently, his passing has dealt a huge blow and created depth or void in your hearts. May your fond memories of him give you some comfort, and may the Almighty God give you the fortitude to bear the pain of this great loss. May his soul rest in eternal peace. I thank you.
Member for Denry North.
Thank you very much, Madam President, Mr. Speaker. Madam President, Mr. Speaker, I rise, like my colleagues before me, to pay homage to the late Honorable Arsene James, former government minister and member of parliament for the constituency of Micoud South. I must admit that unlike the member for Bawano and to a certain extent the member for Castries South East, I did not know Mr. James as well as I probably know his daughter. Not, Mr. Speaker, Madam President, not for the reasons that have caused the members opposite to chuckle. In fact, Mr. Speaker, Madam President, his daughter was here with us today, and I enrolled at the Teachers College at the same time in the late 1990s. That is why I know his daughter better than I knew him. And it has nothing to do with the reasons that caused the member for Soufrière in particular to chuckle. Mr. Speaker, I received a text message on the morning of Saturday, July 28th, from one of Mr. James's relatives who resides in Micoud South. She informed that Mr. James had been airlifted from St. Lucia to Martinique the night before, that is the Friday night, because of failing health. I was shocked like the independent senator because I did not know that Mr. James had been so severely ill. I expressed hope that he might have recovered, but I was forewarned to brace myself for the worst. Just as had been predicted by my informant from Micoud South, Mr. Arsene James succumbed to illness less than 24 hours thereafter. The friend and native from Micoud South decided to inform me because she knew of my friendship with the deceased MP. Most of us will know, especially those of us who are close to the community, that after he left active politics, Mr. James was very much integral with the Burial Society movement. And many of my constituents who still pay society as we know it, travel to Micoud to make their payments, and upon the death of a loved one, they go to Micoud to receive what is rightfully theirs. And as parliamentary representative, more often than not, when you have a death in your constituency, people look in your direction for support. And for me, sometimes support is manifested in the form of transportation to the valley, to Micoud, to collect society money. And so in my personal capacity, upon receiving the news that he had died the Sunday morning, I paid the following tribute on my Facebook page. And I read, I am deeply saddened by news of Mr. Arsene James's passing. The former Micoud South MP and Education Minister died at hospital in Martinique earlier this morning. Mr. James was a former parliamentary friend and colleague who always wished me well in ministerial life. His advice was that I always remain grounded in community and true to the people who elected me. I often teased him about never having seen him take selfies with his smartphone. He often chuckled at my obvious mischief. We shared a good laugh in the lounge, and at the time, the lounge was upstairs. Age difference, Madam President, Mr. Speaker, was not an impediment to our camaraderie. He was the eldest in the parliament at the time, and I, the youngest. I saw him lose his school in the parliament just once. On the day in question, he was peppered by the indomitable Harold Dalston, provoked about demands he, Mr. James, had made for expansion of the Deriso Cemetery. Mr. James was not amused, to say the least, and the rest is parliamentary history. St. Lucia has lost a champion educator and a man who dedicated his life to the service and upliftment of people. Condolences to his family, friends, constituents, and members of his party. May his soul rest in peace. To the family members who are here with us today, I want to say take heart, take courage in knowing that Mr. James served community and country with distinction. May his soul rest in peace.
Senator the Honorable Belrose.
Thank you, Madam President. I'm not blessed with the gift of eloquence that most of the speakers here are blessed with. But having worked with Mr. Arsene James, particularly in the last 2 years, I'm happy with the reflections that I've heard here this morning. Exceedingly happy. And as the leader of our local government authority in the constituency of Micoud South, he was very adamant that we needed to continue to empower the people of this country. 2 years ago, or even before that, a simple opportunity to sign off on checks for community projects did not exist for local government councils. Mr. Arsene James fought hard to ensure that we reinstated that, to give the people more autonomy on the ground in the communities, and that has changed. So we are happy that we are all celebrating a great man, and I'm happy. It's a sad occasion, but I'm happy because he stood for the principles of transparency, accountability, and participation of our people. And on the issue of participation, I recall when I newly became Minister of Government, we had a consultation in Deriso. It's Deriso, I think it was. Yes, Deriso, that's where he, Deriso. Yeah. And we went into Deriso, and we were about 25 minutes late for that meeting. And we did call before to indicate that we would be late. And I started the meeting because I knew I had to start because Arsene was there, you know. And so I started the meeting by saying, first of all, let me apologize to you for our late arrival, for this engagement. I know that Mr. Arsene James is here, and if there is one thing he stands for, the principle he stands for, is the principle of being on time. That's right. And if you cannot be on time, at least call to say that you would not be on time. And then he stood up and said, Senator Belrose, I'm happy you said that. And that just opened the floodgates for the most productive meeting on local government that we had in this government. And so I can say that his short professional interaction with me was a significant one, and I'm indeed heartened by the fact that he left a legacy. He did things the right way, and he left an example for all of us to follow. And I hear that coming through, and I trust that as we progress with the local government reform process, that we will all understand that we have to do what we have to do in the interest and development of the people of this country. I say no more, but thank you very much, and of course I would like to extend my condolences to the family, and thank you, Madam President and Mr. Speaker and the members of the team here for your indulgence.
Senator Gideon Ferdinand.
Thank you, Madam President, Mr. Speaker. First of all, I just want to acknowledge that the passing of Mr. James has actually caused something to happen today that I've always spoken about in the House. I think it would be a good way to perhaps make a decision among us. and it's the conduct of parliamentarians in this Honorable House. Today, I think I've seen what we can use as a model, both in the lower house particularly, and to a lesser extent in the upper house. And so, even before I say anything about Mr. Arsene James, I want to see that his passing has probably given an opportunity to this Honorable House to reflect on the way we conduct business. And so, sometimes the silence that was spoken about speaks very loudly. And so in his silence, as he rests in peace, we as parliamentarians have an opportunity to get certain things right. As many of us may know, the Honorable, the late Sir Arsene James is not only someone that I know, not only someone who is from Micoud South, like myself, but he's also a family member, because the extended McFarlane family, as we call it, Wasma Mac, is probably one of the largest family streams in Micoud South, of which I am part. So Arsene James and I share family connection. It's obvious that we are on opposite ends of the political spectrum, and I warn, before my colleague starts, I warn that there is room for the family to make their choices. And that's one thing that I think was respected and is still respected. And I'm happy that there is more than one McFarlane in the House of Parliament and involved in the political spectrum. It will make sure that whoever is in government, Micoud South, will get the type of representation that it deserves. I also want to say that in addition to the family connection, I happen to have served in certain areas where Mr. James had served. Community organizations, the Micoud Secondary School, as we know, he served as principal for many years, and I served as principal for 10, and also taught there. As a teacher in the community, most people know him or refer to him as Teacher Atin, as one of our colleagues said. His wife, former wife, and even his children also have served in the teaching profession. And so there is a connection that we share. And even at the most combative moments, as I recall in 2016, when I made my political debut, I believe that Mr. James and I still shared a certain level of mutual respect for each other that I can say existed until his passing. I'm very pleased that this was so, because sometimes as politicians we forget that the people are looking and they're learning from our actions and not just what we see. And so I think the life of Mr. James epitomizes exactly what we ought to be doing in public office. And like everybody else, we all have our sins and we all have our dark moments. But I think what is significant is how our contribution to public life and our contribution to the people that we serve, cause people to acknowledge our strengths that far outweigh our weaknesses. Mr. James also was, you might not believe it, the godfather of one of my siblings. And his sister, the late Elizabeth, was my godmother. And I can go on with a long list of connections, but I don't think it will really be relevant to you because it may not mean much to you. However, I want to say that maybe the cool demeanor that we heard about is probably a genetic thing. And I can tell you it serves you well. It serves you well, especially in education. I found out as a principal that you need to have a cool head. And I've also found out as a politician that it's even more important to have a cool head. So thank God that it may be a genetic factor that I inherited from the McFarlane family, and I'm grateful for that. I also want to say that there are little things about people that go unnoticed. And with Mr. James, it was very easy to not notice certain things. But as his successor at the school, being able to access some of his records, one of the things that I noticed, and I'm not one who, I don't really envy anything anybody does. I have my own way and I respect people's styles. But if there's one thing I could have wanted to have that Mr. James had, was his handwriting. And when I perused the records, I don't think he ever needed a typewriter or computer because he wrote so well. And so the archives will reflect that he had a brilliant handwriting, and maybe some of our students who he taught would have benefited from that. I want to be brief, and so I will leave out most of the other details about the connections. But to say that from Micoud South, being from this constituency, I'm very proud to be associated with the gentleman and his family. And today I want to, on behalf of the opposition, on behalf of myself, and all of us in this honorable house, like I did when I visited the family. Unfortunately, he actually passed on the same morning that I was leaving the country, so I didn't get a chance to visit the family until, a couple of days ago. But I want to say that on behalf of all of us, the family has done a great deed by allowing their father, husband, son, brother, cousin to give service to this country in the field of education as well as in the field of politics. And I think the benefits of his service will live on. I want to express condolences to Josephine, my former teacher and colleague, work colleague, Jasmine, Algernon, my classmate who is not here, Virgilia and Vanessa, and the rest of the James family, and wish them well, as I know they are a family that knows how to bond together and stick together and give each other support, and that from here on, it will continue to symbolize the kind of unity and togetherness that we need to survive in these tough times. So, like I said when I started, if there's anything that we need to take from today, is that it is possible in this honorable house to conduct business properly. And I am hoping that it will set the tone for what we'll be experiencing in subsequent sittings. Once again, my condolences to the family, and I wish them well. Thank you.
Honourable Member for Castries North.
Madam President, Mr. Speaker, colleague parliamentarians, both the upper and lower house, former Prime Minister, Sir Vaughan Lewis, members of the James family. We've come here today and we've brought our activities of government to a halt for a short moment to pay tribute to a former parliamentarian, a colleague, a man who served his country at various levels in our society. We do this not merely for the show of doing it, but because of the exemplary behavior, the contribution, and the manner in which he has served our country over the years in the respective quarters. And so in doing this, we tend to reflect and to roll back our thoughts and our memories of his contribution. And very often when we come here, when a colleague has passed, whether current or former, it is always a sad moment, and it's always a moment for reflection, deep, deep reflection.
And for me, there are moments that I recall the Honorable Arsene James when he served. And even if I didn't really know him before he entered the political arena, I believe that the moment which strikes me most about Mr. James is that period of time when the United Workers' Party was decimated at the polls, with every single light going out, with little trace of the legacy of the party on the landscape of this country. And so, in keeping with the words of Martin Luther King, who said, "The ultimate measure of a man is not where he stands in moments of comfort and convenience, but where he stands at times of challenge and controversy." That's right. And I believe this is the signifying moment of Mr. James's contribution, his political contribution to this country. He ran the 1997 election campaign at a time of great controversy as to whether it should be Arsene or whether it should be Lilia. And of course, at that moment of controversy, the results prove itself that united we stand, divided we fall. But having fallen at that election, Mr. James was one of the pillars who stood with us, with the then political leader, Dr. Vaughan Lewis, and myself as General Secretary, who galvanized the country on a weekly basis, be it Sundays, Mondays, Good Fridays, or Easter Monday, meeting in his living room on many occasions, attempting to address the fall of the United Workers' Party and how to deal with what appeared to be a new phenomenon in our society, where tout moun te leba, personne pate vote by flambeau. And in those moments, many a Sundays, Dr. Vaughan Lewis, Leonard Motout, Stevenson King, and others would journey to the East Coast to sit and to discuss, to organize, to plan, to visit, to attend, to participate, and to make an effort at remolding an organization that was designed to unite the people of this country and to change a country that needed to be united at all times. Mr. James was certainly a pillar in that effort. He certainly got his reward when in 2006, after all of the effort, but rather in 2001, after all of his effort combined with others at the reorganization and reprofiling, restructuring and modernization of a party which operated on a 6-page constitution, but now on a 36-page constitution, won his seat and became the leader of the opposition. It wasn't an easy time because there are those who stood out and opposite, who saw the United Workers' Party as a failed organization, and many of us were criticized. Many of us were demonized. many of us were torn apart because of what we stood, because of what Mr. James stood. But Mr. James maintained his cool nature, his measured ways, and he made his contribution to his country in what transcended to be dedication, commitment, and loyalty. The features of patriotism, of country first above self, and not necessarily looking to see what is there for me, but what can I do to help the people of his community and by extension, the people of his country. He did that selflessly. And of course, many of you have spoken of his discipline and his principle of being on time at all times. And I recall once attending a meeting with him, and we pulled up in the parking lot together. And the delegates who were with me turned around after I greeted Mr. James, and he gave what I still consider to be a half wave. They asked, a half wave with a limping motion towards the location for the meeting. They asked, is he talking to you? Are you all vexed? And I said, he just wants to get there before me. But that was the man. That was the man. A man who served his country well. And so today the family, the James family, must be proud of having given to St. Lucia, given to us on this side, and probably the Caribbean, a man who in his heart knew exactly what he wanted for his people. And when you listen to the parliamentary representative for Castries Southeast, when he speaks to the occasions when Mr. James, in an effort not to merely complain and make noises about a situation in his constituency, but to take the initiative and to participate in the little that he can do, knowing full well that there may be no benefit for him, to fix the roads, to participate in community activity, and to assist his people, to be resilient, and to rise to the occasion in times of adversity. And that was Mr. James. He is one who would do for others in a time when he knew not what they would be able to do for him when he needed help. Selflessness. So today, in addition to expressing our appreciation for the fact that the James family was able to provide to this country one who contributed in community, be it at the social level, whether it's the society on a Sunday, which he gave up everything else and went to his society, whether it's in education, where he taught for many years, as the senator indicated early on, and emerged and rose to the level of being a school principal, or whether it is in politics, where he served for 15 years, most of those years in opposition. It is really a time for us to do what I think we all must do, and that is to use this occasion not just to speak about Mr. James and all the goodness, because I'm sure he has ills, or he had ills, not to speak of all the good, but to take a page from his book, what he promoted, what he portrayed, what he distinguished himself with, those good things, to take a page from his book and to see how we as parliamentarians can practice some of the exceptional things that he performed in our society. Many have said today seemed to be a very nice and lucid presentation or sitting of the Parliament. So after a storm, there's a calm. But we can have no more calms in the future. No more storms, rather, in the future. We must all persevere to continue to bring about a calm environment to this chamber, be it in the upper or the lower house, so that our people can be confident that we have learned from Mr. James, his behavior, his discipline, the manner in which he treats his colleagues, the kind of attention he brought by what he said, how he said it, the things he did, what he did. So that our people can begin to say that here are politicians in whom we are well pleased. We trust and we honor and revere them. So from my family and I, it is a moment of reflection. It is a moment of contemplation. It is a moment for us, for me, to re-examine the manner in which we all participate on the landscape of the politics of this country. For we are called upon to serve not ourselves, but all who we represent. That we may be different in opinion, we may have tribalized this country over the years between red and yellow, and we may have cut too deep into this business of politics in our attempt to divide the lot. And so, if we are to follow the behavior of Mr. James, who certainly, I'm sure, had absolutely no enemies opposite, far less on his side. If we are to follow his behavior and the manner in which he operated, if we are true to ourselves and we are committed to the cause of creating a better society and improving on the quality of life and the standard of living of our people, we will emulate him in being selfless in the provision of the service that we give to the people. To the James family, please accept my sincere condolences on the passing of Arsene, even though, for me, it was very surprising. Because a few days before his passing, I didn't know he was ill, I called him to provide some information on behalf of the Prime Minister. And when I hung up the phone, I said to myself, even though I know Arsene to be a measured person in his operations, in his behavior, it wasn't Arsene I was speaking to. And I related that to someone else. A few days later, he submitted the information that I requested, and my secretary said, Minister, Mr. James submitted the information, but it's confusing. It's nothing to what we requested. And I then called him back and tried to resolve it, but I decided I'll do what has to be done based on what he has given me. So for us, it's a great loss. For his community, it's a greater loss. And for the country, I think it is the greatest loss. I thank you.
Member for Beaufort North.
Thank you very much,
Thank you very much, Madam President, Mr. Speaker, members of Parliament, the wife and family of Mr. Arsene James, his friends. I express condolences to the family of Mr. James. On behalf of the people of Beaufort North, I am aware, Madam President, that Mr. James has many friends and even relatives in the constituency of Beaufort North, in Vigier in particular. Avec, moi voulais dire, famille Mr. James, Madame Lee Ishley, avec famille qui, moi c'est parti avec famille, on behalf of Jean Beaufort North. Madam President, yes, it is true. When a man or woman lies in his or her box, facing up, facing the sky or the darkness of his or her own box. In this case, he has nothing but obviously the energy that never diminishes. Les moun mort et yo ka couché a dit dans ce que yo pas qu'attendre rien mais l'année bagay yo te tan avant. This person knew from prior to his death that in death growing tributes will seek to place the tributes themselves at the altar where the sermons are made, at the altar that seemed to create saints all of a sudden. Avec avant moun mort, Madame Président, nous tous savons qui les nous kay mort. La kay ni a chay poisé, ou kay tan a chay bel bagay, mais de laisser bay ça ka dit parce que ces bay là même vle élever koyo, ces voix même vle élever koyo parce que moun salaza mort. And so all I really need to say to the family, to Mr. James's family, I will say the same things that I said to Mr. James when he was alive. In fact, apart from his family and maybe some of his close friends, probably the member for Labrie and I can say that we knew Mr. James, apart from his family and other very close friends, the longest. Mr. James was our school principal at the Beaufort Senior Secondary School, and we had many interactions with him. Many discussions from school plays, sports, and at the time, we were kind of close. It is to the family I want to speak so that they can add to their own memories a few things that they did not know. For I'm sure most of what the members of Mr. James's family heard today or will hear today, they, better than anybody else, would know the pains that he went through in the politics, the joys, what calmed him, what drove him. And while this is very ceremonial, I really want at the end of my presentation for them to leave with a little something that they didn't know. He was a very strict disciplinarian, most of you will know. Let me say James c'était à mettre l'école, les nous t'ai allé l'école. Il était toujours qu'à parler about discipline. And I can never forget, there was an incident with a gentleman called Balo when we were in Form 5.
And as the principal of the school, Mr. James decided that although we were in Form 5, Balo and I needed some discipline and some therapy with the school strap. So he took us up to his office. You had to walk up the stairs. Those of you who knew the Viewport Comprehensive Secondary School, it is this block with the staff room. You had to walk up the stairs and go to Mr. James's office. So we walked up the stairs, entered his office, and he said to me, "I know you to be a very good boy. Why are you creating trouble in the Form 5 class? You're debating with somebody, but you want to fight and all kinds of things like that." I tried to defend myself. He didn't want to listen to me, and he proceeded to pull his drawer where he kept a nice leather strap. So when he pulled the drawer, I'm sure Balo can remember that. Now Balo is a very big guy, tough and tall. He's in the police force now. When he pulled the drawer, Brother Balo said to him, "Mr. James, what are you doing with this?" And Mr. James was startled. And he said, "What?" He said, "Mr. James, what are you doing with this thing there in the drawer?" So Mr. James calmly pushed the drawer back, and he said to the two of us, "Go outside." Afterwards, he came to me and said, "But Musa, why are you doing these things? Why you think you can come and disrespect me in my office like that?" I said, "Mr. James, not me. I'm not the one who said that. It's this guy over there." And then he gave us some lines to write and so on. And even in the parliament, up in the lounge, he and I joked about that particular incident. And he told me the reason he didn't use the strap is because he did not want, in his old age, for Balo, this big man, to remind him that he used the strap on him. So he told me he was not afraid, but he did not want to go into his old age with this. So I wanted to give the family that kind of, it's a little joke, but just to tell you that his demeanor, that particular demeanor goes way back. Moi, Mr. James, later Parlement, moi c'était ministre agricole, j'étais toujours qu'à parler about agricole, parce que tout le monde savent, ici un monde qui sorti des ruisseaux, avec des ruisseaux, c'est une place agricole, avec moi, Mr. James, toujours qu'à parler about agricole, avec même si, Madame Président, nous tenons dit bête nous en Parlement, et toujours, as the leader of the opposition said, he always called me to speak about agriculture. Called me on the phone and said, "Musa, what's happening to this and what's happening to that? Why didn't you do this and do that?" And then I would explain to him. And so, if vous qui, Mr. James, même si nous avons débattu au Parlement, Monsieur Salah, c'est un monsieur qui était toujours voulu parler avec nous en cas concite avec le Parlement. I want to say to his family that the glowing things I really want to take with me really has to do with his demeanor. He and the God Spirit will deal, I'm sure, with their own business within the level of energy. And I want to say to the family that I am sure you will miss him, and I am sure the extended family will miss him. I urge you to be strong, as in times like this one, when everyone has left the cemetery and everyone has gone home, that is the time you really, for weeks and months and years, you really feel the pain of death and the pain, the sadness and the loneliness. So I pray to God that you have peace. I pray to God
that you get the strength to deal with this death. And on behalf of my family and my constituents once again, I say sincere condolences to the family and to his friends and to all who knew him. Madam President, merci and Shai. Mr. Speaker, sorry, Madam President, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Soufrière, Fonseca.
Madam President, Mr. Speaker, the late Arsene Virgil James recognized from the onset that leadership is a clear matter of choice that must be fueled by relentless passion, love for humanity, and above all, the joy of serving others. He, the humble, quiet lion of the voiceless, our brother in transition to the dimension of a new life beyond our planet, the late Arsene, affectionately known as Atin, never viewed his elevation to the office of service as a matter of position. Like Les Brown, the American motivational speaker, author, and former politician, Honorable Arsene James, as a champion of service, believed that, and I quote, "If you put yourself in a position where you have to stretch outside your comfort zone, then you are forced to expand your consciousness." That he did in many spheres of his life, as a community worker, a man of friendly society, an educator, principal, parliamentarian, faithful leader of the opposition, and as a minister of government. Honorable Arsene James was also guided by the philosophy that in life, as in politics, one can't be too cautious in the choice of his adversaries. Hence, he opted to befriend all at the choice of service to community and nation. As a man grounded in the belief that choice was a purposeful and deliberate matter for careful consideration, his choice was again very clear in the touch of flambeau light that he opted for to represent the people of Micoud South, to illuminate the pathway through his committed and steadfast service as a parliamentarian. As a parliamentarian, he fought a good fight for his people, dedicated to fighting the wrong that needed resistance, and always enthusiastic in helping the cause that needed assistance. In service to others, he lost himself, while finding peace, comfort, and joy in rendering more and better service than was expected of him. Success to him was founded on the sincerity of service to others, and never at the expense of others. Lip service to him was not service at all. His life of service exemplified respect and appreciation and love of community and people. His ultimate passion was in giving of himself, not for himself, but through himself to the service of others. I am touched by such a devoted life, Madam President, Mr. Speaker, and moved by his selflessness, passion, sense of calling, dedication, and love for service of others. Atin, Madam President, a man of all seasons, that man of the people, with the people and for the people, in his quiet raw, championed the cause of the people by this life of service and commitment. Mr. Speaker, Madam President, he lived a life of something deep and enriching, a faithful life of love that touched those he served. May eternity be gracious with him, and may the afterlife receive him with joy and gladness. Let the angels welcome him with melodious symphony of sweet trumpets, and let us all rejoice that this son of our beautiful Helen lived a proud life of service and love for others. Prime Minister and parliamentary colleagues, let the life of service of Honorable Arsene James ever keep us on track to the service of the people. And on behalf of the people of Soufrière Fossajac, I extend my sincere condolences to you, the family, and the good people of Micoud South. I thank you, Madam President.
Senator Mangal.
Thank you very much, Madam President, Mr. Speaker, fellow parliamentarians on both sides of the political divide, and also from the lower and the upper house, former Prime Minister, Honorable Vaughan Lewis, to the James family. Madam President, Mr. Speaker, today we have lost a great man. We have lost a great son of the soil in Mr. Arsene James. And what is most distinct about Mr. James, Madam Speaker, Mr. President, is his humility. And that emphasizes the point that great men, men of substance, men of great power, men of great achievement in this world are normally men who are humble, men who do not exalt themselves at all, but men who are humble in the quest of making a marked contribution in society. And this really reflects Mr. James and Mr. James' life. When we heard of Mr. James and the many years that he has served as an educator, as a principal in the school in Micoud, Mr. James' contribution to the human resource development of this country is the best that you could come up with. Madam Speaker, Mr. President, when one devotes their entire life towards educating our people, towards the human resource development of our people, this in itself is a marked achievement. And even right here in this honorable House and the Senate, we, based on the contributions before me, there are many persons here who speak of their interactions, and there are persons here that Mr. James has educated from both sides of the political divide. And that speaks for the kind of person Mr. James is and the contribution he made. More so, Madam President, Mr. Speaker, we should look at the contribution Mr. James made as the parliamentarian to his constituency of Micoud South. 15 years from 2001 to 2016, of which only 5, one term of those 15 years was as on the governing side. So he spent most of those years as an opposition parliamentarian. Yet still, Mr. James was able to unite those people of Micoud South, to have won your seat and to be in opposition with your party having such a slim amount of parliamentarians in government speaks of your ability to be able to unite your people. So I really believe that Mr. James was not just only a UWP parliamentarian, but Mr. James was a parliamentarian for all of the people of Micoud South. And that is why he was elected most of the times when his government was in opposition. And his achievement in Micoud South would speak for that unity. I am not from Micoud South, but I do have my roots based in Micoud South. For the entire Mangal family came out from the Diga community. And I normally would visit the people, visit my family and friends in Diga, and I know of the greatness that they've spoken about Mr. James. I know of the many contributions that he would have made. The selfless acts. Mr. James would sacrifice everything for the people of his constituency. He was the type of parliamentarian that would give it all to the people of his constituency. And I know that even after he decided to call it quits, after he decided to retire in 2016 from being a parliamentarian, Mr. James continued to make his marked contribution to Micoud South. And I know the Honorable Prime Minister will miss him dearly, because you could say that Mr. James was his right hand. And Mr. James was the one who was doing the necessary assistance on the ground. And right there with the opening of the Diga Road Rehabilitation Project, I remembered the site when Mr. James made his presentation, made his speech. You could have seen how elated Mr. James was, that finally, that his people in Micoud South could have had this proper road that he dreamt of for so many years. And so he carried on and made reference to many other projects that he would have loved to see happening in Micoud South. And I remember him clearly talking about the water project. And the honorable member for Babonneau explained to us that right up to the point before Mr. James' death, he was available to attend a meeting and to make his mark representation to assist the people. So to the James family, I would like to say thank you very much on behalf of Micoud South. Thank you very much on behalf of the people of St. Lucia to have allowed Mr. James to make such a meaningful contribution to our economy, to our society. And I believe as parliamentarians that we should reflect on Mr. James' life. Most of all, reflect on the fact that he was a humble man and that he was able to achieve so much by being humble. For it is the very good Bible which says, "He that humble himself shall be exalted." Let us not exalt ourselves, because we shall surely be humbled if we decide to do so. And so, in the human resource development of this country that Mr. James contributed so much to, I normally recognize that this in itself, in our very small country of just over 170,000 persons, we have a limited human resource. And it appears to me that based on whichever party is in politics, and so it almost appeared to me that our human resource is being divided in terms of its utilization in the country. And so we need to ensure, my people, that we must play our various political roles, whether it be in opposition, whether it be in government, but let us utilize to the best of our capability our scarce human resource development. That in itself would honor Mr. James. Thank you very much to the family. And Mr. James will be missed. Mr. James will clearly, the people of Castries, of Micoud South, are certainly mourning his loss. But let us, in this time of mourning, look at Mr. James' life. Look at the positives from it, and let us move forward, looking at this great man and taking a positive message, and for us to continue to reflect positively and do what is best in this country for our people in Micoud South and for the nation at heart. Thank you.
Member for Labrie.
Thank you very much, Madam President, Mr. Speaker. I join my parliamentary colleagues in expressing heartfelt sympathy to the family of the Honorable Arsene James. I would also like to express condolences to the family on behalf of my own family and constituents. Madam President, Mr. Speaker, an anonymous author once wrote, and I quote, "In the democracy of the dead, all men are equal. The poor man is as rich as the richest, and the rich man as poor as the pauper. There the proud man surrenders his dignity, the politician his honors. The wrongs of time are redressed, and the irony of fate is refuted." And I want to re-echo a quotation by Andrew Jackson that the leader of the opposition actually reached out for earlier, that when death comes, he respects neither age nor merit. He sweeps from this earthly existence the sick and the strong, the rich and the poor, and should teach us to live, to be prepared for death. Madam President, Mr. Speaker, it is certainly not my place to preach about preparation for death, I am sure the Minister of Religion will speak to that preparation before committing the body of our departed brother to the bosom of the grave. I will not speculate whether he migrated to the silent continents of eternity, voluntarily or involuntarily, but certainly, as the member for Beaufort North indicated, I'm probably one of the few who knew Mr. James in this house prior to elective politics, because he was our principal at the Beaufort Senior Secondary School. I remember him as a sober and serious man. So serious that he only smiled for a microsecond and immediately wiped that smile off his face until he got something good to laugh about, and you'd laugh for 40 days and 40 nights. But he never had a painted smile, Madam President, Mr. Speaker. He was always a humble and decent man. And I remember a quotation by Thomas Guthrie, and I quote, "The Christian is like the ripening corn. The riper he grows, the more lonely he bends his head." He was always a calm and peaceful soul in this house. I remember on one occasion, I tried to tease the honorable member. He was on his feet, and he was saying something that I was in disagreement with. And I attempted to tease him. And he said to me, "Alva, don't forget I was your principal." And I immediately retreated to that moment when I entered Form 4 and remained there instead of responding as a member of this honorable house. On another occasion, he came to Labrie in a ceremony. And as the parliamentary representative for Labrie, I welcomed him to the People's Republic of Labrie. And he said, "Alva, I knew Labrie before you." That was the type of individual he was. Benjamin Franklin said, "After crosses and losses, men grow humbler and wiser." You see, Madam President, Mr. Speaker, you cannot be in politics without taking blows, without people trying to malign your honor. This is why Alva Romanus Baptist, born at Martin Luther Street, Labrie, in 1967, has assumed a posture that he shall never attempt to malign anybody in this house or outside of this house. What I say and think about you when you are alive, I will say the same thing when you are dead. We are passing through this world. We are in transit passengers, waiting for our boarding call. And whilst I speak about crosses and losses, I listen to members opposite speak, my colleagues in government, and it seems that they have reflected since the death of the Honorable Arsene James and want to emulate his fine example of humility, decency, being nice, being friendly, and not being, just for the people that voted for them, but for everybody. And I welcome that. They are searching for an entirely new beginning in the politics, Mr. Speaker. And I welcome that. We are very happy for this acknowledgement, because the best tribute you can pay to anyone is to try to emulate the fine example. But you see, the parliament of this country is a place where we must debate. A lot of people talk about us, this parliament, we always debating and we always quarreling. That's our job, Mr. Speaker, Madam President. We are here to debate the issues of the day, to debate the cost of government, to make laws and amend laws. Most of the time we come to this parliament, we agree, We sit in committee stage and we amend bills and we exchange. Most of the time we agree. But there will be points of collision. And I'm hoping that the acknowledgement on the part of the government
that the time has come for them to emulate the fine example of our brother who just left this particular dimension and entered into another dimension in the new universe of life. That you took that page from him. And do not make it look like we come here today and nice words, and by next week you hear Grindberg and Rochamel and those kind of things. I am hoping that those issues are buried. Now, you know, only time will reveal, Madam President, Mr. Speaker, whether members opposite are serious about ensuring that Mr. James, like Mr. James, that our deliberations should be a survey of contending views and ideas. Long live this Parliament. Long live the people of Micoud South. And Madam President, Mr. Speaker, I will continue to keep the family of our brother, Honorable Arsene James, in our prayers. May you rest in perfect peace, my comrade. According to the late judge, we'll see in Valhalla someday. Thank you.
Member for Micoud North.
Madam President, Mr. Speaker, I beg your permission to read a tribute on behalf of the Honorable Edmund Estefan, who is unable to be with us today, but felt compelled to send his tribute so that the family and constituents can know how much Mr. James meant to him. Madam President, Mr. Speaker, though there is considerable distance between my current location in Taiwan and St. Lucia, time and distance cannot shrink this historic tribute to this towering legend of a man and servant of the people, the late Honorable Arsene James. Commitment to Honorable Arsene was the foundation of great accomplishments. To him, the biggest commitment was the commitment to himself to be gentle in spirit, manner, and attitude while serving others. Madam President, Mr. Speaker, our gentle but powerful brother and leader of spirit, heart, and immense fortitude recognized that durable trust was the key requirement vital to inspire, build, and uplift others. His leadership at all levels of community, society, school, ministerial, and parliamentary meant evoking participation larger than the task mandated, with a commitment deeper than the ocean's depth. Loyalty to the people and the numerous causes that mattered to the Honorable Arsene James formed the main components of the plasma and platelets that ran in his bloodstream. When it came to the pursuit of his goals for the upliftment of others, his desire, motivation, and commitment were unrelenting. It was that passion and drive to excellence that enabled him to serve with vigor and rigor. Madam President, Mr. Speaker, by all measure and by all accounts, he was a productive individual, and that was not by accident. Such a feat was always the result of a commitment to excellence, intelligent planning, organization, and focused effort. He was an individual who loved to follow through, and as such, commitment to him was an act, not a platitude to be bandied about with unsympathetic thought or care. It was commitment, Madam President, Mr. Speaker, that moved him into action, and it was discipline that ensured that he saw it through till the end. Madam President, Mr. Speaker, it was a joy, privilege, and tremendous honor to serve with a champion and a legend of the people, the great Honorable Arsene James. My most sincere condolences to his immediate and extended families and to the people of Micoud South. I thank you. Now that was from the Honorable Edmund Estefan. Madam President, Mr. Speaker, on an occasion such as this, it is easy for us to accord to the deceased all the accolades that one can muster. And sometimes that can be a good thing, but at times I worry the extent to which that we have become a posthumous society. That is in death that we celebrate our colleagues, our peers, our family, and our friends. I pray that the passing of Arsene James, my colleague, someone who I depended on for sound advice, especially while in opposition, someone with who I had reason and the privilege of interacting with as a student, as a young professional, and as a politician. And on each occasion, it struck me that notwithstanding his physical stature, that he was very genteel, very kind. A man who clearly was always in control of his faculties. And like an honorable member before me alluded to, I too have no more than one example of Mr. James ever being slightly unnerved or disheveled. And it is that kind of character that, as has been said before, that perhaps we should endeavor to emulate in his honor. I could not help but notice the very unsavory remarks that were made in the immediate aftermath of the passing of Mr. James because of politics. And that is why I was so heartened when I scrolled down the page and I saw the tribute from the Honorable Sean Edwards. I said, Lord, there is hope. Somebody has sense still in this country. And maybe we have done ourselves this disservice. How many of the viewing public or the listening public are aware of the kinds of interrelationships across the aisle? All they see is political theater. And that's just what it is, theater. When we're downstairs or upstairs or we go to the various functions, we have a healthy exchange and a laugh among ourselves. Why this seeming subliminal fear that our respective supporters will see us being kind and civil to one another, and so we have to maintain a posture of acrimony and bitterness and unsavory competition? Why? You know, it struck me how bad the situation is when I attended this year's graduation ceremony of the St. Mary's College. And the valedictorian in his address wished his colleagues well and said, some of you will become doctors, lawyers, accountants, nurses, whatever, and even politicians. You know how diminishing that is? And even politicians. As if to suggest this is the most demeaning, disrespectful, the least of the professions that one can aspire to become. And so I ask ourselves the question, how many of us are conducting ourselves in such a way that young people can say out loud, I too want to become a politician. I too desire to become a politician. You know what I say to those professionals who believe that they are above politics and will not descend into politics? I say the reason we can have this conversation in an open space is precisely because of the value of politics and governance in this country. Because if it goes too wrong, you and I will no longer have the privilege of sitting in this open space and having a drink and a laugh without necessarily having to look over our shoulders. And you can drive your kids to school along the roadways and pray and trust that they'll have a good day. It is politicians who ensure that we hold the country in place, that we ensure that there is adherence to the law, we ensure that services are provided, and we protect the interests of the people in this chamber when we come here to debate, to create laws, or to revise new ones. So if it is politics is so unimportant and so demeaning a role, well, let us all go on vacation for a while and see what will become of the country. As the political directorate, both the opposition and those of us sitting in government have a very important role to play. I would not suggest it is a greater or lesser role than any other, but I want to say it is one of honor. It is one of honor, and must not be looked upon as anything less than. And we therefore have a duty to ourselves and to the profession to ensure that when we are gone, our colleagues can say kind things about us, albeit posthumously, but that these things also be true. But that these things also be true. And my colleague here, Mr. King, he says it all the time. He says there's a life after politics. You and I have to walk the streets of St. Lucia after politics. You and I have to access services after politics. And we must never lose sight of that. And that is why when someone like Mr. James passes, as unfortunate and as sad as it is, to me, it is his last contribution to the St. Lucian society to say to us, wake up. Let us be kind to one another. And sometimes I wonder whether that's why we hard-code the prefix honorable before our names, because we don't feel so innately, or people don't think that of us naturally, and so we have to force it in the name designation. But let us be honorable. We can disagree of decorum. We can disagree vehemently with one another, but with poise, with respectability, with decorum, like Mr. James did. And I can never forget, I mean, this man, I'm looking at the chair across there because that's where he sat beside me when I was in opposition. And I would lean on him for guidance, literally and physically. And he was so generous with sharing his experience. You know, some human beings believe because they got burnt in the fire, they will not forewarn you. Because they believe that the greatest lesson you can have is to experience it in the first person and not protect you vicariously. But he was not like that. He pointed out the pitfalls. Don't go this way. Watch this move. Be minded of that. That's what you call mentorship. Something which is so lacking in our society. Like my colleagues, it was one Friday, I received a call from party headquarters advising that Mr. James was ill and that we needed to send him some flowers. So I shared the number and the details of my florist to arrange the flowers to be sent to him. But even as I went through that process, it never dawned on me that that might have been the last. And like everyone else, I too was in shock when I learned of his passing. Mr. James had a very quiet sense of humor. I recall when there was rumor that he might assume the role of Governor General. And so I teased him about it, him becoming Sir Arsene James, Governor General of St. Lucia. He said, with all these cameras up there? And I said, but what do you have to hide? And we all had a chuckle about it. You remember that? He was such a private man. So private. And it does not surprise me that he has exited this life in the manner that he has. No fuss, no fight, no exuberance, no extravagance, just very quietly. His penmanship was impeccable. I would peep at his notes written on this yellow pad, like yours. Yes, the Honorable Member. But let me tell you so, now that you're alive, you too also have an impeccable penmanship. I always tell you about it. But the Arsene James had the most impeccable penmanship. And, you know, if you're handwriting your notes, one would think that in your train of thought and translating your thought to words, you may make an error or two, and so there may be a word or two crossed out. There were no errors. Just continuous prose. Just continuous prose, handwritten, debate notes. He don't come with any fancy iPad or any such thing. I remember one day we had a meeting and his phone was misbehaving. And he had difficulty engaging with the phone and telling telling it what to do next. We were in Guy Joseph's office down in Southeast Castries at the time. I said, Mr. James, you seem to have a problem with these phones. I don't understand. They just do what they want to do. They don't really subscribe to anybody else. But he was such a simple man. Such a simple man. I recall, too, that Mr. James, his politics was all about the people. It was never about him. And that kind of sacrifice is rare. And that is why I really want to thank the family for affording St. Lucia and for affording all of us the privilege of knowing your husband, your father, and working alongside him. His was a rare kind of man. His life in opposition was even more telling of the character of the man than his life in government. When we enter politics as politicians, we don't realize we really are dragging everybody into it with us. We are. That even your cactus at home may be negatively affected because of the politics. And I want to thank you for being part of that sacrifice. When I attended St. Joseph's Convent School, there was an assembly theme that we would have ever so often. What if today was your last? And I remember even as a teenager, I'd be very disturbed by that theme. But in the cycle of assembly themes, it would come up at least once or twice a term. What if today was your last? And if today were our last, if today was our last, how would we like to be remembered? Members like the President of the Republic of Labrie, we will immediately think of something navigational, taking flight. It would come to us instinctively. My dear friend from Castries East instinctively would think flashing mirrors, you know. But beneath that, and my dear friend from Dennery North, who does not want to go and mention his close association with Micoud North, will always be highlighted. But how will you want to be remembered? And that is the question which I think, when we find ourselves at those junctures where our character, our mettle, the core of our being is being put to the test. As I always say, it is at these times you see people for who they truly are. In times of adversity, in times of hardship, when subjected to persecution, what character do you display? I will forever remember Mr. James for his dignity, his decorum, his comportment, his humanity, his gentleness, and his people-centered politics. We can never adequately accord to him all the accolades that he deserves, given the magnitude of his contribution. May he rest in peace, and the family can rest assured that you will be in our prayers. Thank you.
Honorable Prime Minister.
Madam President, Mr. Speaker, can I also join my colleagues in acknowledging the former Prime Minister of St. Lucia, Sir Vaughan Lewis, and his wife, Mrs. Lewis. I also want to acknowledge Mary Josephine Fraser, the wife. His wonderful daughters, Jasmine, Virgila, and Vanessa, and also Jasmine's husband, Felix. You know, throughout this ordeal, because that's what I have to call it, is an ordeal. Because like all of you, I'd met Mr. James several times before his death in the last week. In fact, one of them was we were renewing the constituency councils. And you'll know that Mr. James was chairman of the Micoud South Council.
And he sent me the names, which included his name back as chairman. And I called him up, not wanting to specifically ask him about himself. So finding a diplomatic way of saying, are you sure that all these names have confirmed that they want to be renewed? And he said, yes, 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 yes. So that was only 4 days before he went into the hospital at St. Jude. It was an ordeal in that when I saw him, and I'd been seeing for some time that he was losing weight, but I know that he'd had back problems, and it was causing him difficulty in moving around. And I attributed it, well, maybe he wasn't eating as much, or he just was not getting around, but he just wasn't himself. But you know, you could never tell with Arsene. He would sit there and he would smile. I would go to his home, and a very humble home, but one that he obviously loved very, very much, and one that he felt comfortable in. And he would take some time to come out of his bedroom and then come and sit with you in the living room. And again, never complaining about any pain or any difficulties. The only time I knew, and it took me a while to learn about Arsene, was the one thing that was singularly the most important. I mean, other than his family, and I know that that was true. But with his family, he was incredibly private. He never brought his family directly into politics. Never. Although the name James is synonymous with politics in the constituency. But he never spoke of his family. He never promoted his family. His family was his. But the one thing in which he visibly created boundaries around was society. So I learned the trick of when I'm going through the constituency and I wanted to pass by Mr. James, I would stop and just look through to see if he was sitting in the balcony on the chair with society, and people would be lined up. And if he was having society, you just didn't go, because it would be a very abrupt conversation, because you could see, like many of us today who are pegged on our phones, so, you know, we're having conversations and we're on the phone, right? There's one of those kind of conversations. Society became everything. And I say that to say that that says everything about Mr. James. That, above all, his commitment was to his society. And he made every single person that came there feel special. And they were more important than even the Prime Minister sitting behind him. They were more important. I would have to wait in order to meet with him until he's finished his society. So I learned, as I said, not to go there when I saw the line, which happens to be a lot of times after church on Sunday. So it eliminated the ability of me being able to accomplish a couple of things at the same time, going down to the constituency and seeing him. But I want to go back a little bit in time, in that my first interaction and engagement with Mr. James was, like many of my colleagues here, was in 2006 when we had our first cabinet. And unfortunately, we were notoriously late for everything. Many times we would say we're starting cabinet at 9, and maybe hours would go by, and Mr. James was always the first person there. And in those days, I happened to be the second person, and so I got to spend, a fair amount of time with Mr. James and interacting. And obviously, he was the Minister of Education, which is clearly a sector that I'm very, very passionate about. And I loved having those discussions with him. My engagement with him further grew after we lost the election, and we were going through changes in our party, and being able to interact with Mr. James in terms of the structure of the parties and really getting the benefit of his experience. Once I became the political leader of the United Workers' Party, like Gail had indicated, he became a real mentor for me, and a rock in terms of getting advice. And I think we all learned that as angry as we may be or passionate about something we were, go and see Mr. James before you say or do anything. Because he had a way of tempering everything. And something that seemed to be, had to be done and a decision needed to be made, and I need to go after this person, or I needed to take back control of my own destiny. After you spoke to Mr. James, you would leave with a calm. In spending time in Micoud South, I've now understood that that is a quality of Micoud South. Micoud South for me is a refuge. It causes me to slow down. You go down there and things that you would think that are urgent, people have a very different perspective. People are incredibly respectful and family orientated. And you know what? People-centric. You talked about it, Gail. But I'm going to take about the people-centric from a different perspective, in that the quality of family and friends and learning to communicate as human beings is the mantra of Micoud South. And Mr. James was the champion of that. You could never think of having a fast conversation or a quick decision with Mr. James. That was impossible. He would want to find out all the details. Even if he knew the right answer, he would almost inevitably tell you, let's think about it tonight and give me a call tomorrow. He would never rush into that decision. But that is a quality that I'm seeing in Micoud South all throughout the length and the breadth of the constituency. Go to people's homes. People don't want you to just pass by, they want you to have a meal. They want you to have a conversation, not a conversation about politics, they want you to have a conversation just about life. And so Mr. James was very blessed to come from that constituency and to be involved in that constituency. And when we spoke about him not wanting to spend a night in Castries, that's true. Sometimes we would finish meetings at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the morning, and Mr. James would be getting in his pickup, driving back down to Micoud. I mean, several times I offered him to stay at Cocoa Palm or to organize a room for him somewhere else. Never once, not once, would he ever accept the offer. He had to go back down to Micoud. And more than likely, now I understand, is maybe he had society in the morning and whatever, but those things just didn't change. The next really major interaction that I had with Mr. James was really the process of me moving to Micoud South to contest the election. And unlike what is being said or suggested, I'm not the person who approached Micoud South. Never once. In fact, it was Micoud South who approached me from very early. And I was very reluctant to go to Micoud South. And to show the kind of respect and hierarchy that they have in Micoud South, that many of the people in the constituency wanted me there, but they would absolutely not defy the wishes of Arsene. So it only was something that became potentially possible once Arsene had made his own personal decision that he was going to retire.
He was king.
Right? And so it was once that he gave the constituency the go-ahead that he was going to retire, it was then approached. And even during that process, Mr. James distanced himself completely from being the person to champion my cause. Meaning that even though that he'd been the person that was there and was obviously had a right to make a decision as to who was going to succeed him, made sure that it was something that came from the constituency and not from him. But once the endorsement came from the constituency, his support was incredible. And the humility in which he handled that whole transition was unbelievable. to the point that he literally ran the campaign that we had. Mr. James was literally my campaign manager, and very particular about who was going to speak and what time you were supposed to show up and what was the good location going to be and who was going to be the sound system. I mean, he literally loved it. And it became really an incredible relationship after we won the election. Because even in winning the election, certainly for me, my respect and regard to Mr. James, and I know that the love that people had for him in the community, is why I asked Mr. James whether he would take on the position as chairman of the council. Because I knew that there were many things that Mr. James still wanted to be able to be accomplished. And so the Duga Road, the water project, the Blanchard Community Center, are all projects that Mr. James was very passionate about. The feeder roads with the farmers, the continuing development of his farmers, the Angers lands. I mean, the poor people in Angers have lived where a patriarch dies, and like in many other areas in St. Lucia, that many people are left not owning title to the land. And so when we sent the surveyors down, I could see the extra step in him, the energy in him, in that regard. Who cannot forget the more casual side to Arsene, which is the toothpick on the side of the mouth. And that toothpick would move around a little bit more after a couple of doers. And so a person like me, who is a black man, could not afford to go down and drink anything but doers when I was in his home. And in fact, when I had to give him a gift, and I remember once I think that we gave him a bottle of a blue Johnny Walker, had zero interest in it. He was a person that was so humble. I mean, Mr. James and my father became very good friends because I think they both respected each other tremendously. What car they drove, what their furniture looked like, that mattered not. What was important was your commitment to people and the honor of your word and how you conducted yourself and how you lived your life. And Mr. James had that in spades. Probably one of the funnier things I knew about Mr. James was his close relationship with Walter Francois. And it was an intriguing, but both he and Thomas and were very, very good friends with Walter. And I don't know if you've come down there at Christmas time when they're all sitting there, and here are two absolutely opposite sides of the political domain, but yet they got on so well, and they poked fun at each other, and just genuine love and admiration. And that was what I think came out in the sessions today, is that regardless of politics or color, creed, anything, religion, Mr. James always found the best in everybody. And that's why people like being around him, because there was no negative energy around Mr. James. The greatest negative energy he would have is that he would just not respond to you. But he would never say anything bad about you, you know, but he was just a great positive person. And he will, and I will forever miss him in that regard. The ordeal continued when he went into Tapio, and we had a family meeting in the morning to make a determination as to what would the next steps would be for Arsene, because clearly he had multiple complications, and unfortunately our healthcare system is not here to the point where we can manage multiple organs at the same time. And so therefore the decision was made to send Arsene to Martinique. And I want to thank the Minister of Health in particular for assisting us, and I also want to thank the French Embassy, particularly the ambassador and the chargé, for the work that they did, and the president of Martinique, and all the authorities and the doctors in Martinique who really helped in facilitating that, no more so than anybody else.
So I want to say that we'd had 4 evacuations that week, one of them being a younger baby, and he was afforded the exact same reception that he did. But I just want to thank them for the humanity and the respect that they showed him. And so I decided, and I don't know what made me do it, but decided that I needed to go down to the airport. To go to the airport to see him off. And he was on the tarmac, and they were transferring him from one bed to the other bed. And again, the intuition or the fear of the worst caused me to go and hold his hand before. And not knowing what really to say, but just because we had spoken earlier about his ailments and how he was feeling, I just said, Arsene, I love you.
That's a man.
And he said, I love you. Right? And take care. So I say to all of us, I say to the family, I say to my constituents in Micoud South, that Arsene bestowed on me the greatest gift in where he agreed and supported me to become the custodian of a seat that he loved so very much. And I am so grateful for the experience of knowing him and being reminded every day of what are the important things in life. And it is my full intention to certainly continue to live and walk in his footsteps and continue to serve the people in Micoud South with the same level of humility, same level of passion, and the same level of ambition. So if the House, Madam Speaker, Madam President, and Mr. Speaker, I wrote something because I didn't know if I was going to be able to make it through, speaking ad lib. So I just wanted to read very quickly what I wrote. I said, with the passing of Mr. Arsene James, St. Lucia has lost a true statesman and gentleman, par excellence. Not only was he my mentor and advisor, but in many ways a second father to me. No visit to Micoud South was complete without my stopping by his home with his ever open doors for his counsel and his honest conversation. He became my rock in so many ways and taught me about not only politics, but about life. He cared only about family, his beloved community and society, and his beautiful island of ours. Material things and money meant nothing to him, but he wanted the best of everything for the people of Micoud South. And he was incredibly excited about our shared imminent plans for the constituency's development. Arsene was quite simply the most selfless and humble man I've ever known. There are no words to describe how much I shall miss him, but I am blessed that God gave me time to tell him how much I loved him and what he meant to me. May he rest in peace.
Honorable members, I have decided to do away with my prepared presentation because I think all of you in some way have reflected my own thoughts. But on behalf of my family, myself, and the staff of the Parliament, I would like to take this opportunity to extend our deepest condolences to the family, the friends, and the people of Micoud South on the passing of our beloved brother, Honorable Arsene James. Thank you.
Honourable members, the question is that this Parliament in joint session assembled do note with sadness the passing of Honourable Arsene Virgil James, SLC, former Member of Parliament, on Sunday, 29th July 2018. Be it resolved that Parliament expresses deepest condolences to the family of the Honourable Arsene Virgil James and the people of Micoud South. And be it further resolved that a copy of this motion be transmitted to the family of the late Honourable Arsene Virgil James, SLC. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. Aye. As many as are of the contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Honourable Prime Minister.
Madam President, Mr. Speaker, I beg that the House be adjourned, sine die.
Members, the question is that this Parliament do stand adjourned, sine die. I now put the question. As many as are of that opinion, say aye. Aye. As many as are of a contrary opinion, say no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Sitting adjourned.